Goes.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and pardon the little frog in my throat. Joining me tonight is going to be Paul Von Ward, and I've already got him on the line with me. And before I go any further, Paul, I can hear you breathing on your end. You might have that microphone a little too close to your mouth.
Well, I'll just move it back a little bit. How's that?
Yeah, that's a little better. At any rate,
can move it even a little more.
That's good.
Good. Okay. Thanks for telling me.
Thanks, and I appreciate that, bearing with me with that. Real quick, like before we start the show, I want to remind everybody that the call-in number is 632-832-7904. If you want to ask Paul any questions or just call in to give some comments of your own. Also, I want to mention the fact that before the show started tonight, I got a call from my friend Anthony Sanchez. He's the author of UFO Highway, and he mentioned to me that one of his friends that was a UFO researcher and had a book out of his own on the topic of UFOs has recently passed away over the last couple of days. And this is a fellow that was new to the UFO arena that actually I had never heard of until Anthony mentioned him, but I thought I would mention it anyway for those of you that might have been familiar with him. He was the author of Open Your Eyes to 2012 and Beyond, and his name was Drew R. Maras, and he's no longer with us as of 2 days ago. And I just thought there were some people that might have heard of him that might have been interested in knowing that this is happening. If anybody has any information about it, y'all want to email me at redneckradioman@comcast.net. I promised Anthony that if I heard anything about the circumstances, I'd get back to him with it since, the whole thing was really very weird or unusual because he was a peace advocate during the 2012 process that was supposedly involved in a murder and a shootout with a cop, which didn't kind of fit his character, so we thought maybe there was more to the picture that we was unaware of. So if anybody gets any news, let me know and I can pass it along. Paul, how are you doing over there tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you. We're having a spring day here in North Georgia. You wouldn't know that it's the middle of January.
Really? You know, it's kind of unusual. I've been noticing that we're in the middle of January, and we've been having like 60 and 70 degree days and 40 and 50 degree nights, which I thought by now should have been much colder.
That's what we're having this week, too, and I noted that because it's such out of the ordinary for this time of year to have this kind of weather, and that may be another one of the effects of, the turbulence that's going on around the planet in terms of climate change and all kinds of other activities.
Yeah, and actually that also is supposed to relate to end times in 2012, which actually, if I remember correctly from reading your book, We Have Never Been Alone, you touched bases on that 2012 in the Mayan calendar in more than one spot. But before we go into We've Never Been Alone, you were actually also here to speak about a book called Lost Civilizations and Secrets of the Past, which is an anthology put out by New Page Books, in which you and several people have added a chapter to, like Philip Coppens, Frank Joseph, Nick Redfern, Thomas Brophy, Stephen Sora, Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Oberon Zell, which, by the way, folks, y'all were due to hear my interview with him Saturday, and I had a system failure on my end due to a power failure, and as y'all can hear right now, the system's back up. So you guys that missed that, I've rescheduled Oberon for the 21st of this month. And it's also got Scott Allen Roberts, Freddie Silva, Micah Hanks, Patrick Chenard, Adrian Gilbert, William Bromley, and of course tonight's guest, Paul Von Ward. And Paul, when I went and read your chapter in Lost Civilizations, I noticed you kind of looked to me like you had a brief summary of your book, We Have Never Been Alone. Can you tell us a little bit about your participation in this?
Yeah, well, first, let me just say something about the book. I think it's a very exciting book to have all the people that you just mentioned come together and talk about the same hypothesis, the ancient astronaut hypothesis, or as I call it, the advanced being intervention in human history. And you get all these people's different very solid research perspectives on this issue, and I really recommend it for anybody who's interested in this whole notion of our relationships through time and in history and up to date with more advanced beings than humans. And so I was delighted to be a part of that. And, of course, Eric von Daniken also has a closing chapter in the book. And, of course, he's the dean of this whole approach. He started back in the late 60s. He got me on this track with his book, The Chariots of the Gods. And I didn't do much about it for many, many years because I was following a rather traditional career path with, military service and U.S. diplomatic corps activities and embassies and things abroad. And, you don't, when you're having those kinds of jobs, you don't do much research on the side. But I finally resolved that issue by resigning from government some years ago and deciding to just write full time. But I have to give credit to Eric and his staying power. He's just still continuing to bring out new insights in this area.
Yeah, and actually, Eric, he was here before even Zachariah Sitchin, and he's still after Sitchin, here after Sitchin is gone. So
I know.
He's been here. He's going to be here for a while longer.
He is. I've had a few contacts with him over the years, and I'm just amazed at the stamina. And also, a lot of people get on a one-track road in this field that we're talking about, and don't sort of dig around in other areas that are of interest. And he's covered the whole area. I mean, all parts of the world and all of the evidence areas that we can talk about. Although I have to say, he hasn't covered some of the areas that I covered, and we've never been alone. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Well, I noticed that now when I've read his books, he's covered like almost every location in the world and the actual artifacts and structures and that sort of thing.
That's right.
And the mythology, whereas you've actually covered similar areas, but you've also covered like more the DNA research as well as the artifacts. And he covered artifacts, but like he didn't cover DNA, for example.
Yeah.
And some of the other things that went involved with it. So you covered I guess you could say places, but not exactly items the same.
Yeah, what I tried to do is, Eric's work and Zachariah Sitchin's and other people who have been blazing the trail in this area. I wanted to, there's no need for me to duplicate what other people have done so well, but I'm as a sort of interdisciplinary cosmologist, as I call myself, I take a look at any area that we're doing research in and look for other disciplines that corroborate the hypothesis that we're working with. And that's why I wrote the book, to try to bring in a discussion of the fossil record, the evidence of our fossil history that we've got a pretty good picture of at this point from mainstream science. And what they've produced corroborates the ancient astronaut theory because it shows the times in history where we had these missing links, or these great leap forwards of primates to get out of the sort of brutish Homo erectus type of creatures to Homo sapiens, and then Homo sapiens sapiens. And so the fossil record and DNA research is another area which we need to look at, because it also corroborates the timeline that a lot of us have been talking about on the basis of the myths and legends and the artifacts and the structures that are still around the planet. And then I added to that the development of language, and also looked at the question of the cultural developments of religions, systems of ruling tribes and countries and nations and groups of people, and how that was affected by the advanced beings, the alien ancient astronauts that were obviously, from all the evidence that we have, intervening in human development in more ways than one.
Yeah, a lot more ways than one.
Yeah. It's not just as some of the ancient tales talk about, that the gods came down and helped humans out after the flood or the cataclysm of about 11,500 years ago. It helped a lot of humans in different places around the planet to rebuild their cultures and civilization. It was the Earth was so devastated by that event 11,500 years ago that mainstream scientists today, they're getting away from it because more and more evidence is going against their theory. But 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was first going back and looking at the textbooks, they were saying, that was the Neolithic period. All the humans were living in caves and just learning their rudimentary skills to develop housing and agriculture and so on. But now we know that there have been advanced civilizations even before the flood or the cataclysm of 11,000 or so years ago. So all of these areas of evidence are important for us to have a fuller story of what this means when we talk about advanced beings and ancient history getting involved with humans, because it really shaped who we are and what we are as beings at this time on this planet. And of course, I think you know from reading the thing that I have written in the anthology and also the book, we're kind of a subspecies of a humanoid species that I would say is probably galactic size species.
Right.
And we're certainly compatible genetically in certain ways. I mean, the evidence suggests that humans as we are today are really hybrids, created out of or developed. I don't like to use the word created because it was an intervention, it seems, that the beings that were evolving on planet Earth were genetically manipulated first in the laboratory, and then a little bit later on, as the Bible said, talks about that the sons of the gods found favor with the daughters of men, and that became not just laboratory intervention, it was a miscegenation of these two groups producing us as we are today. I think that probably happened when the mainstream scientist folks have dated Homo sapiens sapiens' arrival, when we really came into our modern form, and
right.
The DNA that we have that has facilitated the skills and language and intellectual capacities that we have today.
Would you equate that to maybe the days of Jared and maybe just before Enoch?
I would say so. I've tried to put these texts, as Zechariah Sitchin did so well, and I've tried to figure out the timelines of all these accounts, and it's
not easy.
It's not easy, and so what I do, I try to simplify it and think about it as the artificial manipulation of DNA about a 250,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago. And then you get into the actual sexual intercourse and physical continuing mixing of DNA, but through the normal, birth process. And I put that back about 100,000 years ago. And then, we don't know much about that history. I mean, what we know is the tales of Atlantis, and I think there's increasing amount of evidence to suggest that this was a highly developed civilization, which involved both humans and the gods or the ancient astronauts. But they somehow pulled out and survived and left the humans to go through the cataclysm where most of us were destroyed. And then they came back, and the story of Noah and the flood, and there are stories like that in not just the Hebrew tradition, but all around the world, including our Native Americans on the northwest part of the United States. Their legends have similar stories of the gods.
I talk to a lot of people. They'll tell you that from America to China to Europe to Germany to Mesopotamia, the legends are all the same. It's like a unilateral thing that happened with everybody.
Yeah, exactly. But I think people had different experiences of it, and I'm not. Anything I say, I don't want to declare it as 100% perfect and factual, because we have to sort of bring together pieces of the puzzle and try to make sense of it. But from my point of view, and I write about this in both the anthology that you mentioned and in We've Never Been Alone, that after this cataclysm, we obviously had the Middle East, which is our Hebrew, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Indian, Indus, river, valley civilizations. We call that the cradle of Western civilization. So that's certainly, obviously, one area. But we have now so much evidence coming out of China. And when I first wrote about this, 10 years or more ago, we didn't have much coming out of China. But I thought there was enough at that time to say that the Tianjin Plateau, that is the highlands in the western part of what's now China, was another area, where the ABs really involved themselves technically and giving technical assistance and so on, including possibly even some language skills and ideographic systems that are very different from what we got out of the alphabetic system in the western area. But at the same time, I think that we had this sort of intervention going on in the Andes in what we now call South America. And so you had different levels, different approaches of advanced beings helping different groups of people. So there's a general level of knowledge and a general level of awareness of the intervention, but it worked out differently in these different parts of the world.
Like some people would get one religious doctrine and some people would get a different, or some people would be more technologically advanced than another.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that's very important, and I spend, as you know, several chapters in We've Never Been Alone on this religious development theme, because that was a function. I mean, how the different religious orientations or spiritual orientations grew up on the planet. That was a function of the local humans' interaction with these more advanced beings. Humans obviously saw them as very advanced and more powerful, and they were in fact colonized, or humans were colonized or enslaved by these more advanced beings. But they had different orientations to the humans that they were controlling. And I think in the Western world, the stories are pretty much dominated by the figures of the Anunnaki or the Anakim or Elohim, whatever word we want to use to describe them. You know, they were rather harsh rulers, demanding, using a lot of physical force, brute murder and torture and punishments of all kinds if the humans didn't get in line and do what they wanted humans to do for them. Whereas I think over in the Chinese section, it was a little bit different, and certainly it was a little bit different in the Indian, I'm talking about India in Southeast Asia today. That was a different one. And the same thing in terms of the Western Hemisphere. So that's, in my view, that's why we have these sort of 3 or 4 different basic different orientations towards these advanced beings. And those experiences had an effect on the spiritual and religious development of the different groups of humans around the planet.
I think you got something there. I might mention at this point, and before I go any further, I did forget to mention earlier that your website's www.vonward.com, and I put your link in the chat room as well. But what I was going to say while you was talking about the different streams in religion, that I recently read a book by Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock called The Master Game, and in it they discussed the fact that there was, you got different branches of almost all religions, but there was 2 basic doctrines or streams of doctrines that they've traced back all the way back through the flood to the days of Adam. One was more esoteric and one was more exoteric, and I think they were onto something with that, and I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you might have found the same pattern developing through all the different religions that you're talking about as well.
Yeah, and I talked about it, I'm talking about the same thing that you're describing there, but I think there has been a struggle among the humans who were left to their own devices after the ancient astronauts, the Elohim, pulled out and withdrew to other bases somewhere else, and sort of left humans alone for a while. I think there's been this tradition, and the word you use is sort of that they use in their book is the what we call the esoteric tradition, the sort of natural view of what was happening versus the supernatural view. In other words, that was just taking everything that the priesthoods who were carrying out the alien sort of culture. They tried to get humans to really, focus on these beings. And of course, that's how we got Yahweh turned into the Christian and the Islamic and the Hebrew religions of today, because the main group of people had this notion. But then parallel with that, you had the teachings of Jesus, for example, of Buddha. The Gnostics, for example, is one of those traditions where they understood that these were just beings. They were much more advanced than humans in technical terms, and they had power over us, and they had much more mobility to get around the universe than we had, and so on. but the Sufis and the Kabbalah orientation in the Hebrew tradition, the Hermetic tradition coming out of Egypt and Greece and so on, these esoteric traditions were what I would call the people who were trying to keep the sort of natural truth of this history available for humans, over the centuries. It's been called the secret doctrine, the other words, esoteric,
mystery tradition.
That's another good term that has been used, and so on. So yeah, I think that's a split in history, and as far as I'm concerned, the work that these guys and all the ones you mentioned earlier and people like me are doing, I think we're in that tradition. We're trying to say, wait a minute, our history has really been distorted by the established religious institutions starting, 2,000 years, 3,000 years ago. And the royal families, the kings, the political side of society, were all connected, to
working hand in glove with the priest of the time, shall we say?
Absolutely. So that you then created what we have today, which is so many billions of people on this planet believe that this story is some sort of divine metaphor or myth or legend, and they want to ignore the fact that we have been influenced, shaped, and we might say in some ways misshaped. That's one of my themes in my writing, is that that whole history of having the punishing God, you got to get in line with the church theology that you are worthless as a being, you are a minor actor in the universe, you depend only on this God that you believe in, because there are all these different religions who have a different concept of the God they believe in. But this has created a psychological state where humans don't take responsibility for themselves. They say,
"This is true.
They're gonna bail us out, so we don't have to worry about our responsibility.
God forgive us."
Yeah, all you have to do is to do the ritual that whatever church or synagogue or temple or mosque you're in, you're told, just do it the way we are telling you to do it, and you will be all right for eternity.
Actually, and I'm sorry I interrupted you on that one, Paul, but I wanted to mention it before you got too far along that I read your biography over at Amazon, and it did mention that you were once a Baptist minister yourself, which would stem from one of the AB religions, probably from Inland's side, I would say, is all the Catholic churches and Protestant movements. My research indicates probably did.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say this is kind of a turnabout from your past beliefs? And I'm with you. Don't get me wrong. I used to be a Pentecostal preacher that's went over to the esoteric side myself. A Pentecostal Sunday school teacher. But I'm just saying that because I know it was a turnabout for me. That was quite a pill to swallow when I first started studying this. So I thought I'd ask you, was it just as hard for you when you first started studying?
Well, I had this question asked by someone recently, and I stopped to think about it, because you would think that it would be a terrible struggle, but somehow, it started when I was 12, when I was saved by the church and was baptized and became a full-fledged member of this Christian faith. But on the same day well, it wasn't the same day. I was saved and all of that through that process of ritual that we're all familiar with who are in the same tradition on Friday night. But on Sunday, I started questioning the minister about some of the things he said in the sermon about people going to hell in Africa before I was able to go over and be the missionary that would save them. So I had this built-in tension, of, well, this doesn't seem right for a loving God to be sending everybody to hell in Africa before I get my training to go over as a missionary, which is what I said at age 12 I wanted to do. And by the time I got to graduate school, 8 or 10 years later, I met a guy named Paul Tillich, and people who've been interested in theology for the last 50 years know that he was one of the great Protestant theologians of the era. He happened to come to Florida State University, where I was studying at the time. Had a chance to meet him and sit in some discussion groups with him, and the way he talked about God, it was very different from what the Baptist Church was talking about. And I had already been changing my own mind about it, and I said, this is what I think about the being or the force that we all came from. And he said back to me, well, that's what I think too. We just, we give the definition to the word. And I said, oh, you mean all of these different churches are just giving the definition to the belief that they have and claiming that that is the only truth? And this wise old man said, yes, this is a cultural concept. We all are seeking to understand the ultimate, reality and source of all things. Anyhow, that experience helped me considerably. For someone that I had a great deal of respect for, and so that's a long answer to your question. There was inner difficulty. Every year, for 10 or 15 years, I would write down my definition of God at the end of each year. And after about 10 years, I looked back at them and I said, man, what a shift in your thinking. And right now, I'm at the point, where, as I've said about my work in cosmology, I see and I have a book out that's about 10 years old now, I think, called Our Solarian Legacy, which talks about the universe as a self-learning universe, which is an expression of the creative force, whatever that is, whatever word you want to use. In other words, it expresses itself through all of us creatures.
Which is the same conclusion I've came to, that we are, if you want to consider God in existence, his tools are extensions of experience. Of course, this is understanding God is the self-learning, creating universe, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, we are aspects. It's sort of like the Hindu tradition, where the notion that each human is sort of like a tip of the wave in the ocean. It's one ocean, and it comes from one ocean, and each of those little white caps are individual humans sticking their heads up for a while and being individual and unique, which each little white top is. It is certainly individualistic and unique, but it's a part of the whole thing. And so that's the way I see it now. And I see the other area that I've been working in recently is reincarnation, and I see reincarnation is the way this creative force of the universe actually expresses itself and develops. It develops through us, learning, experimenting, growing up through different circumstances, learning how to cope and create a better life on the planet that we're in.
Kind of like a doorway to step in and out at different points in time.
Yeah, but I think it's not sort of so much stepping in and out, because I think we remain in between incarnations, integral being. I call it the soul genome, which is also even more aware, probably, of the other dimensions of the universe, and we grasp those other dimensions in our own different levels of consciousness, in our dreams, and our ability to sort of have insights as we meditate and as we communicate with other people telepathically, or we have remote viewing experiences that show that our consciousness is multidimensional. And I think that's all going on all the time. And the incarnation that I'm in right now is, sort of a tempered down, dampened down level of awareness to be able to focus on what we're doing on this planet.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. There were some things that I was going to ask you that after reading actually both of these books. Some of them, though, actually we've already tossed, put our, 2 cents worth on, like the definition of God was one of them that I have to go through now.
Right.
One of them I think I've already asked, and I'm kind of refinding my place and where I was at with that. I try to, usually as a rule of thumb, I don't even get a list of questions ready. But in this particular case, because I'd read your book prior, there was so many things that I remembered that I had wanted to make sure I didn't forget to bring up, in other words, but I don't think I'll have time to go through the whole list tonight. But one of the things that you did cover was something that Zachariah Sitchin had already covered, and by the way, I've read all of his works as well as many of Eric von Daniken's and William Bromley's Gods of Eden.
Yeah.
So, like you, I've been finding this research to be extremely educational, in other words. But let's see where we're at there. Yeah, one of the things I was going to ask you, I think you've already mentioned on this here, was that you, in your book, We Are Not Alone, you talk about the extraterrestrial intervention. It implies past intervention in the title, but in your opinion, don't you think we're still having the same intervention from the same sources? Because during the book you mentioned that they went off and left us, but I'm thinking that they've already came back.
Oh, yeah, no. Let me make that's why the title is We Have Never Been Alone, or We've Never Been Alone. What I meant by that was they've been involved, intervening in our development from the beginning of our maybe even from the beginning of our first seeding of this planet. I know some scientists think that, this notion of panspermia, the idea that simple life forms could be spread around the universe either by sort of natural forces at work or by intelligent forces seeding a planet. So we don't have much evidence on how that might have worked. So I start off, after primates have evolved to the point of Homo erectus and so on, and that's when the real intervention started. But I think that what happened is that you had what I call the physical colonization of humanity, both prior to the flood era that we were talking about earlier and afterwards. But I think, and this is where I agree with Zachariah Sitchin, that his notion that 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, the ruling class of the Anunnaki sort of, for their own reasons, fighting among themselves and disagreements about how to relate to humans and all of that, pulled away. And the reason I agree with that is because I've also, in my reading of dozens of other sort of origin myths around the world, there are similar reports. For example, one that I recall reading from an African tradition, and their view was that these ruling gods got mad and fighting among themselves, and so the older gods in the sky said, okay, we're going to pull you out and you come back up here. And there are other stories like that that are consistent with Zecharia Sitchin's writing in that. But pulling away, that is, leaving the ziggurats around the world, the pyramids and the ziggurats around the world, which were the gods' landing places, and their spots when they were here, leaving them to fall apart, which is what's happened over the last few thousand years. Although we still have a few ruins, they have largely been abandoned. But having pulled away doesn't mean that they didn't stop intervening, and I think we've had physical contacts off and on, and I think even more often than physical contacts, we've had interdimensional contact. People getting messages and communications through our various levels of consciousness. And this is what happened, with Yahweh. Yahweh was no longer physically standing in front of Moses at that time. That was 3,500 years ago. He was speaking through some artifice. Some people talk about the Ark of the Covenant and those kind of things, or the cloud by day and fire by night, as a sort of a spacecraft. But anyhow, it wasn't a direct rule anymore at that time. And then you have the same thing happening to Muhammad. The angel Gabriel allegedly spoke to him, and Moroni, who spoke to Joseph Smith about the Mormon religion, and all kinds of other examples like that. I consider that to be ongoing intervention.
Right.
And it might be intended to be helpful, and I think if I've understood a lot of reports that I've had from people who've had abduction experiences or communication experiences that were not apparently physical, getting information where the Pleiadians or the others from other places have trying to help us out. You guys need to get your act together and do this sort of thing and that sort of thing. Are passing on technological principles. It's not just reversing, crashed UFOs that is responsible for humans, I think, making such significant technological spurts over the last 50 years or more. So anyhow, it's still going on, and
okay.
Some of it is some of it is negative. I have a lot of friends over the years who've had some negative experiences that show that it's not just a benevolent presence.
Like there's a positive influence as well as a negative influence. It depends on which group you're actually in contact with.
I think so, and I think it also depends on the individual too. Some people would see things that are what I would call natural experimentation with humans or natural interactions with humans could be seen as threatening or frightening or devilish or evil, from the human point of view, depending on how they interpret that experience.
Yeah, and the difference between an experiencer point of view versus an observer point of view.
Right. That's right. I have, as far as I know, I haven't had any significant direct experiences, so I'm in the observer seat, and it's a lot easier for an observer to, to describe it with sort of neutral terms than if you were in the middle of the experience, like any number of people that we could talk about who've been abducted or taken up in a craft or that sort of thing.
Right, and expectations, I think, would probably have a lot to do with it, too.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to mention that Genocide in the chat room wanted me to ask you if you think the aliens maybe developed here on Earth in the past as an evolution of dinosaurs, like they went extinct 100 million years ago or more, and perhaps the dinosaurs involved in that period of time to have a civilization similar to our own, and left and are coming back for some reason.
Well, I don't know quite how to answer that. I think that we have what I call templates of conscious beings in our galaxy and in the universe. And one of those templates is the reptilian template, whereas we, in our particular human form at this point on Earth, are part of what I would call the humanoid template. And I sort of think that the dinosaurs were subspecies of that species, in the sense that, let's look at ourselves right now. Look how close we are, for example, to the bonobos. These are bonobos, depending on where you put the accent. These are primates that have so many characteristics, both in terms of physical features, but also in emotions and personal and interpersonal traits, are so close to us. And I think it's very, very possible that a reptilian template could have different levels of physical existence, depending on the environment, depending on the level of evolution. So I think your call in there is not a flimsy one, but I don't know how to answer it in any sort of solid way.
Okay, well, before we go too much further, I thought I'd mention that we're 45 minutes into the program, and I'm not sure what your schedule's like. I have the ability to extend the show if you like, if you feel like continuing on, or if it's getting late on your end and you had something else you needed to do, we could always reschedule more for a later date, and we can work on what time we got left. But I wanted to let you know you had an option on that. Yeah,
well, I really appreciate it, Royce. I do have something. I'm doing a little bit of videoing tomorrow for a documentary that I have to take part in a couple of weeks, and my film person is coming tomorrow morning about 9:30, and I've got to get some visuals and things together. But you want to be rested for him too, I'm quite sure. Well, but I'd be happy to chat with you again. I mean, it looks like we're on quite a common path here. Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that from reading your book and going to your website, we share a lot in our views and in our research. But we still got at least 12 minutes if you want to round off the hour. Absolutely, let's finish that. Yeah, it's enough time if you want to tell us a little something about this documentary you was telling me about. Well, this is a documentary on my other area of current research that I mentioned earlier on the reincarnation experiment. This is a company coming down out of Canada. They have a grant from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to do a documentary on reincarnation research, and they're coming to visit some people in the United States. They talked to a friend and colleague of mine who's done some reincarnation research out in San Francisco area, Walter Simcoe, who's written a couple of books on reincarnation, and he and I have the same publisher on some of our books. He had a Return of the Revolutionaries book published by Hampton Roads Publishing, and We've Never Been Alone, and a couple of other my books have been published by Hampton Roads. So he was filmed, I guess, Monday out in San Francisco. And then Jim Tucker, is the psychiatrist at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, who is following in the footsteps of another psychiatrist, Ian Stevenson, who is probably the most well-known scientific researcher in the world at this point. He died about 3 years ago, and Jim is taking up the work that he was doing and continuing it. So we're going to meet up in Charlottesville, and they'll do some filming of Jim's work and the institute there, their research, and the research that I've done. And people who are interested in that, there's another website of mine called reincarnationexperiment.org. So that's what that documentary is about, and I'm sort of at this point having a two-handed research effort, because I didn't intend to get that deeply into the reincarnation research, but it turned out that when I set up this website for the experiment, I have hundreds of people around the world over the last 5 years giving us information and cases, and we've worked up a pretty good model as a way to identify what's involved in reincarnation and what effect it has on our own development, in the present life. And so that's what I'm working on. There's a lot of evidence of physical similarities, personality, mental talents, knowledge, skills, that gets carried forward from life to life, it appears.
Well, an interesting thing about that is today's modern church preaches against reincarnation, although my study shows that in the actual early church, before the mother church, the Catholic Church, come along, reincarnation was the popular doctrine of the time. Actually, it was with us before the doctrine of hell.
Oh, absolutely. From my current perspective of the history of the religions, I think it's difficult to know exactly what Jesus might have taught at that time, but I think scholars have pretty much identified a small amount of material in the Bible that might be directly contributed to or attributed to Jesus' own words. And in some of those words, there were exchanges about reincarnation, even the question of whether, he was the reincarnation of some other person.
Of Elijah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was mentioned.
Jesus, inasmuch in Matthew, came out and said, for those with the ears to hear, John the Baptist was the Elijah that was to come.
Yeah, that was one of the connections that was made. And so I agree with you. I mean, in the Hebrew tradition, it was very clear that it was part of the Hebrew tradition. Of course, it was in the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition before the time of Jesus. And really, it was knocked out of Christianity by the Nicene Council in 325, when Constantine, sort of gathered together some of the church representatives from many different churches. There was no organization. I mean, you had just different churches all over the place. And he managed to get together a group of bishops from different areas that would agree with him, that we no longer would talk about reincarnation, and we would talk about heaven and hell, depending on whether you were a good Roman Christian or not, you would go one place or the other. So that whole distortion, of the teachings of Jesus 300 years before is a story that most people have no idea about. They haven't really looked at it.
That's true. Most people just they don't even do good investigation of the Bible. They listen to the preacher for the most part and the Sunday school teacher. But before we run out of time, Genocide was asking me to also ask you about the women who get abducted and find themselves pregnant, and then mysteriously the fetus is taken out of their body. He wants to know if you think that's part of some cloning program.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, if we look at our own history as humans, we are evolving and we are becoming less robust as a species in terms of reproduction and health and so on. It's very likely that other species have worked themselves out of a natural, robust physical condition and need to have help from species like ours to perhaps maintain their own species or a hybridization of their species for future development. We're doing now. When I first started looking at all this stuff 25, 30 years ago, humans didn't know how to do what we now do with our genetic manipulation. We are now, I just read an article last week, we now are taking cells of several different individuals, not humans at this point, or at least it is not admitted to be, but of insects or small animals, and forcing those cells from different individual animals together, and then the product is a combination progeny. So if that's being done by humans, more advanced species are obviously doing more at that level, and we are the experimental rats in the cage, if you please, the mice in the cage, for them doing on us what we're doing on the other animals here. I mean, I'm near a university and took a course in neuroscience earlier in the year, and we had our cages of mice and we're manipulating them, and I think we humans ought to understand that we're part of the food chain as well.
Right. And I can understand that. I would tend to agree with it, because in all honesty, we are. But, like I say, we're just about on the end of the hour. And before we get out of here, I wanted to tell everybody that I really recommend both of these books. Granted, on the Lost Civilizations, you only get like one chapter of Paul Von Ward covering some of his material from We've Never Been Alone. However, from the We've Never Been Alone doesn't cover some of the other authors' chapters that's in this book, Lost Civilizations, and there's many great authors, people that I know that's been on my show that have a lot of important things to say on this topic, that they're all put into one place, and it's a wonderful research tool. But I would also recommend We Have Never Been Alone, because it's perhaps one of the most full and most concise books on the ancient alien theory that I've ever read myself. And like I mentioned earlier, I've read Zachariah Sitchin's work, Bromley's work, Philip Coppen's work, Eric von Däniken's work. The list really goes on. I got a whole bookshelf worth of material on this subject that I've covered, and this man probably covers more of the whole broad picture as a whole from the different facets than any other author I've seen to date, which most of them, like he was mentioning earlier, covers the area of the ancient alien aspect that's most familiar to their work instead of covering the whole broad spectrum. So I would really recommend both of them because there's in his book, there's a bunch of wonderful stuff in one location. I sadly did not have the time to, ask them all the questions, but I did save them to a document to ask them next time I have them on my show. A little warning for you there, Paul.
Good. No, I look forward to that. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope your audience people have found something of interest here.
And I also want to remind everybody his website's www.vonpaul.com. I will have a link to his website and his books in my archive when I move it tomorrow. And Paul, I'll be in touch with you with the links to the archive sections so you'll know where all the places I posted our show too.
Yeah, and I'd like to share that with people on my Facebook and everybody else that I communicate with. So.
And I also want to mention to everybody, to remind y'all to stop by United Paranormal International. There's some wonderful folks over there that I work with, and I kind of plug them and they kind of plug me on my show. So I slide that in before we go. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening and being a part of my show, asking questions, and, generally being friendly and neighborly over here. Don't forget to come back and see me Tuesday for the next installment of We Have Never Been Alone. And I'm not really as prepared as I should be as far as having the author in front of me, but I will have it posted tomorrow and letting everybody know. But I think it's going to be Frank Joseph. Paul, it's been a pleasure having you. It was a pleasure the last time, and I do plan to be in touch. I've got some other material I'd like to share with you about reincarnation I thought about that I've been involved with myself. I think you might be interested in, but I'll send that to you tomorrow.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you again.
Okay, and Paul, I'll be in touch with you about a future show, and thank you very much.
Good night now.
Good night. And everybody out there in Radio Land, y'all have a good night, and we'll see you Saturday. Thank you very much.